how what's your story of meeting like founders of Hypar, and how was the pitch?
Uh, yeah. Okay. So I've known Ian for a long time. I was still at NBBJ, which was my first job out of college when Ian was working on Dynamo. Ian, for those who don't know on the call, was the sort of original author of Dynamo, and so he came around and gave a presentation, and I thought it was really cool and awesome. And we had kind of stayed in touch, and that, like, on Twitter mostly, and just giving each other shit every so often. And we would run into each other at things like Autodesk University. I also, I met Anthony, the other founder, in a similar way, various conferences and things like that. And so we had always been kind of aware of each other. I had been working at WeWork a couple years ago, and things had started to get pretty weird. I still look back very fondly on my time at WeWork. It was a really exciting place to be working on these problems of like design automation. But there were also a lot of things that were really frustrating about being there, especially towards the end. And it had started to make the news a little bit. It was like, everybody knew that WeWork was like going down. And I got a call from Ian. It might have even been like a weekend. And he was just like, "Hey, how's it going at WeWork?" And at the time, I think it was just Ian, Anthony, and Matt, who's our CTO. And they were like, "Would you be open to talking about this?" And I said, "Yeah, I mean, things are getting a little weird here. I'm interested in this possibility." And and we talked, and I remember we met in person in New York. I think Ian and Anthony were out for a conference, and we had coffee, and Ian pulled out Hypar on his iPad and gave me a little demo, because I had been sort of aware of it before that. We had talked about it a little bit in its very early stages. And then he showed me what they called them the cauldron, which was the very first time we had workflows. It was like functions that can talk to each other. And then he showed me, like, on his iPad, like drawing a polygon right then and there, and having a whole parametric building system spring up. And I was like, that is so cool. Like, I want to be a part of this. This is just the most like amazing thing. It just feels like the future. And it's really exciting to me because, and sometimes we struggle a little about this because we talk about Hypar like it's the future. And what I want to communicate to people is that it's not the future. It's now. Like, it's happening. Like, it's time to get on board and start using this stuff. But it has this, like, I think this is what the future looks like. This is the way that design practice needs to evolve in order to fully realize the potential of computation. Because right now, there's so much cool stuff that happens, and it just, we show it off at a conference, and then it dies on someone's, in a Grasshopper script on some server somewhere that, and somebody quits, and then nobody can ever open it again. And like, it's just not sustainable. And there are so many opportunities to be more streamlined and intelligent about how we approach the design process. And I think also we're seeing a lot of this. I've totally moved beyond the scope of your original question, but just to finish the thought, we're getting really excited about our kind of contacts with folks who are doing like totally different business models in the architectural practice, like, not just a traditional service firm, but something that's maybe a little bit more vertically integrated, or trying to produce something that's a little bit more like a product offering than it is like a service offering. I think we're starting to see that happen in the industry, and Hypar is a great place to sort of build the technical infrastructure for something like that, because of the sort of principles of automation and reuse and efficiency and all of this stuff that goes hand in hand with, a sort of product-oriented offering. So that was a really long answer.
No, it definitely gives a lot of perspective, and I also feel like Hypar has a lot of potential, and you guys have put such a simple, intuitive interface for people to get on board into it. And like, I could just imagine how much complexity it's going in the back end, and like software engineering problems here. So
yeah, I never get bored, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, and like, you guys have a good vibe on like Twitter also. Like, everyone is like passing around fun comments and also sharing technical stuff. So it feels good.
Yeah, the team is incredible. I mean, I'm lucky enough to have only ever worked at companies that I really liked with people who were amazing. My whole career, I've never had a bad job, but this job is so good. Like, I can't even tell you how much fun we have, how incredible the team is, the way that ideas are discussed and how fast things move and how passionate everybody is and how talented everybody is. It's just like, I mean, I'm in heaven. Like, it's an incredible place to work. It's an incredible team. And I'm so excited about what we're doing.
Yeah, and that brings a good segue to my next question. I wanted to know like culture of Hyper and also culture at WeWork, because I
Hmm.
know I was talking to Levo and
Oh, yeah.
he was saying like at one point like WeWork was the golden age where a lot of people like you, Daniel, and even Brian Wrigley, like I just want to imagine like what was the vibe at that time.
Yeah. I mean, uh, like Lebo's spot on. I mean, it was an incredible time. It was I mean, just the density of really, really smart, interesting people doing really, really cool stuff all in one place. It was electric. It was really amazing. And, I think it's a shame that the kind of business oriented stuff started to go the way that it did, because I think the ideas were really critical. And I think also that the seed of that was really Case. Case was this design technology consultancy that was acquired by WeWork and became sort of the basis of WeWork's sort of BIM sort of expertise and excellence. And that was always, when I was just starting out, I was like, oh man, Case is where all the like really, really cool people are. Like, I want to go be a part of that. And when Case sort of got absorbed into WeWork, I think a lot of that went along with it. And WeWork was an incredible place. And I think specifically in this line of what I was talking about earlier about sort of a product oriented mindset, the idea that space is a product and that there's room to do product iteration, to do A/B testing, to like think about these things through data and just continually improve space as a product is such a compelling and interesting idea. And I don't believe that like there was any flaw in that thinking. And I also see that a lot of folks who have left WeWork are now carrying on some of these ideas out in the industry, which is really cool to see. And yeah, I mean, I think I wouldn't be at Hypar if it hadn't been for the time I spent at WeWork and the learning that I did at WeWork. I had been writing a lot of plugins and stuff, but it wasn't really until WeWork that I was really doing like writing fully fledged software tools. I also give a lot of credit to Guy Talarico, who I think a lot of people know, who was, a close collaborator of mine at WeWork and who taught me an immense amount. And so, it was really an incredible time. And then, as people started to peel off, it got a little bit less exciting and a little bit less fun. And, everything is a little bit scary when there are layoffs and when there are budget cuts and when everything seems to be kind of like slowing down a little bit. But, and to speak a little bit to the culture at Hypar, I think I give a lot of credit to Matt Campbell, our CTO, who he worked on the Revit team and also was at Google leading a team for a number of years. And he has crafted an engineering culture that I think is really superb. There is a tremendous amount of trust on our team. It is a very safe place to express ideas, even disagree with each other and argue. Sometimes that's the most fun. And we move really fast. It's a process where, I don't go off and develop a feature for 3 months and then come back and plop it in. We're constantly developing, releasing, iterating, improving, testing, figuring out what's working and what's not working. And we break stuff sometimes, and that's okay. I mean, it's, obviously we want to stop breaking stuff, but I've screwed things up even in production, and there's a culture also of no blame when it comes to these things. It's very, everybody just pitches in to get the thing fixed and figure out how we can avoid making the same mistake next time. And the other thing is that, coming from a non-traditional software engineering background, I was trained as an architect. I always had a serious case of imposter syndrome in the area of any sort of software development stuff. It's like, I wasn't trained in this. I don't really know what I'm doing. And our team is like mostly former architects. In fact, I think only Matt has a CS background. And it's incredibly empowering to work on a team where like there's no expectation or penalty of knowing this obscure algorithm. Like, oh, you don't know how to do a bubble sort? Like, what are you doing? Like, none of that. I have never once been made to feel like I should have known something before. We just all learn together and we grow together and we build stuff together. And, when we need help, we have each other to rely on. The amount that I've learned just being a part of this team, it's like I would say like greater learning density than at any other time in my life. Like I'm learning and feeling like I'm growing in my ability to do stuff like every single day. And it's just incredible. I mean, I'm gushing as I often do. But the culture is just like incredible. And I want, the other thing is that I'm gonna veer off on another tangent. I think that there's a lot more in common between the practice of software engineering and the practice of designing buildings than people realize. Some of that needs to be facilitated by technology, like Hypar, as well as other things. But I also think it's a cultural thing, and it's a process thing, and it's about like mechanisms of collaboration. It's about every piece of code that I ever write is reviewed by somebody else. Somebody looks at it. Somebody says, actually, I probably would change that, which is just like an immense safety net. It's like, if something goes wrong, it actually like two people messed up, not one. And I feel like design processes, like there isn't really a great formal, at least on design teams that I've worked on, it's like there isn't really this sort of clear mechanism by which stuff gets sort of reviewed and continuously improved. And also this idea of sort of like the blameless postmortem, or like mistakes are the team's fault. They're not the fault of individuals. And so, I think everybody deserves to love their job as much as I do. Everybody deserves to work on a team that has as like caring and dynamic and exciting a culture as ours does. And I think that like design practices can function like that. I'm sure some do. But I think that like it's also not a mistake that some of the technical infrastructure stuff like Git and being able to do pull requests and being able to sort of like establish these routines and processes which go hand in hand with the sort of cultural processes. I think architecture maybe lacks some of the technologies to support those kinds of processes. And that's something we'd like to change as well. So big tangent.
I see. And like I could see that like the flexibility, productivity, and like growth at Hyper is quite visible. So like how do you guys like meet once in a week? Like how is the growth and productivity done? Like
we meet 3 times a week regularly. So on Monday, we have kind of a all team meeting where we just go over everything we're all working on. And then Wednesdays and Fridays, we do a little check-in, and then other meetings kind of as needed. We have also like a weekly happy hour, as well as our little like public Hypar Live events, which are really fun. Shout out to Hypar Live. If you're watching this and want to hear more from our team, like go register for Hypar Live. We do it every couple of weeks. It hasn't been super regular lately, but it's always a good time. But a lot of our communication is via Slack. And, we collaborate that way. We do a lot of pair programming. So we'll get 2 engineers together and, work on stuff at once. There are some cool tools in Visual Studio Code that let you do this now. You can like share your live working session and like chat and stuff. And it's really cool. I also think like there's this like all of our processes are oriented around this idea of like maximizing impact. So, we do quarterly planning and we try and figure out, what we're trying to achieve and what sorts of growth numbers we're looking at, and everything sort of in a very neat way bubbles up to the question of like, what do we want to achieve and how do we get there? And that just breaks down and down and down into individual tasks. So every day when I sit down at my desk, I'm, maybe not explicitly, but I'm sort of asking myself the question, like, how can I have the most impact today? What can I do to create a feature that's going to drive people signing up? Or is it more worthwhile for me to, do a tutorial or a live stream, or is it more worth it for me to work on a function? Should I be talking to users or should I be building stuff? And it's all answered. The answer to that question is always, well, like, what will have the most impact? Like what is going to make the most difference? And we always tie that to how do we measure that impact? Like what are the indicators of the impact we want to achieve? Is it sign-ons per day? Is it, how many people are using this function per hour? Like, how do we tie into this? How do we build instrumentation that lets us get feedback about whether something is working? And then how do we also change strategy when something isn't working? So we try really hard to like make a hypothesis. It actually is sort of very scientific. It could probably be more scientific, but make a hypothesis about a thing we're going to do, the impact we expect it to have, and a mechanism for finding out whether or not it's working. And then a date at which we'll say, okay, at this point, if it's working, then we keep doing it or we do more of it. And if it's not working, we try something else. And like, I think that has allowed us to just focus on what matters, because I think engineering teams, and I'm as guilty of this as anyone. And it's certainly, like when you get a bunch of engineers together, all you want to do is like build the cool feature. It's like, oh, I have this cool idea for a feature and I want to build a cool feature. And so maintaining this like impact oriented mindset has been a real awakening for me. It's like, no, don't stop before you build the feature. And in fact, like, let's do a little bit of review collectively. Let's decide whether let's figure out what we're trying to achieve by doing this feature. Let's figure out how we know whether or not this feature is having the desired effect. And that sounds like maybe extra work, but it winds up becoming second nature. And it just means that you wind up building the right stuff and also building stuff that's small instead of massive, because you want to do the smallest version of any given feature that will allow you to determine whether or not it's a good direction to continue pursuing, rather than building this massive thing that took 3 months and then finding out, oh, nobody really wanted that in the first place.
Yeah, and that's so great to have like clear vision and performance metrics, so that every day, and it feels like when a person is internally motivated, that itself drives to work like more and like get it done.
Yeah.
And you mentioned about like testing out features quickly instead of like a 3 months. Like, how is the brainstorming culture, and like are like people just, oh, let's do this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination. I think like for any medium size or larger feature, we'll do a design doc, and that can be pretty quick. If you're not familiar, I mean, I think every company does this a little differently, but basically it's like define what the problem is you're trying to solve, define a set of approaches. Like, just one answer to the question is not sufficient. You have to at least consider a few alternatives to how you might solve the same problem, share it with the team. Not everybody has to review and read every design doc, but everybody has an opportunity to, if they want to, or if they want to raise an issue. And then, you settle on a tactic and you deploy it. And then, for smaller stuff, sometimes as like a warm up in the mornings, I'll be like, what's been really annoying to me lately? The fact that like, I can't see whether or not one of my workflows is public on the main page. And so I'll just like, take an hour in the morning and build it and put it out there, and it goes. The other tactic that we use, which I think is sort of pretty common in a lot of sort of fast moving software organizations, is rather than doing large feature branches, we do flag guarded features. So we'll actually, all of the latest features are actually like already in production. It's just that you don't see them because we haven't flipped a flag that makes them available to you. But that way we ensure that there isn't some weird incompatibility between these two features. And so that lets us do little experiments, like we can turn on the feature for half the people and see whether it causes any issues before we release it all the way. Or we can have special beta testing user groups that have access to those features and things like that. So that also helps a lot with velocity and the viability of a feature. And a lot of times we'll build a feature, we'll put it behind a flag, and it will never get released. And sometimes that's okay. Maybe a new idea came along that was better than that one, and we don't need it anymore, and we'll just take it out of the code. But I think that's what the risk of not having any process is it's the Wild West, and you build the wrong thing. The risk of having too much process is that it's like kind of a slog to develop anything new. And it's like, ugh, I don't want to write another design doc. Like, are you kidding? Like, I just want to build the thing. And I think we've managed to, it's never perfect, but we've managed to strike a really good balance between like, just get it out there, test some stuff, but still making sure that people have a chance to review. We have we consider our alternatives before we like push a feature through just because we want to.
I see. And do you guys plan to work in person or remotely in the future?
I mean, I don't know. We joke about like, oh, when are we going to move into Hypar HQ? I really like the remote work lifestyle. So, I mean, COVID was no difference for most of us because like we were already on Zoom all day and already, working from our homes. I would love to, one day there may be some physical locations or there may not be, I think what we have is working really well. I think that like, I understand why the physical in-person office is a thing, and I don't think it's going away, although I think, obviously we're seeing some change in that. But, I could see a future where that's never a thing for us. I could also see a future where, yeah, we get big enough that it would be better to have everybody in one place. But I think we're a couple years from having to make that decision at least. So,
Where is the headquarters located?
there isn't one.
Oh, I see.